So the DHS is saying all the right things about prioritizing Americans first for filling lost jobs. Are you hopeful about this endeavor, or are you somewhat skeptical?
I think that the changes that were recently rolled out are long overdue, but they are welcome anyway. Um, the figures from DHS, I thought that was interesting because if you look at the data between 2007 and 2017, nearly 3 million jobs, or I should say, there have been nearly 3 million H-1B approvals. So that's a lot of jobs and a lot of wages. And a brief overview of the H-1B is this is a visa that is used to import immigrants with so-called specialized skills to work in special industries. They're most commonly employed in the tech industry. And so these changes, uh, normally I am skeptical of stuff like this, but DHS looks like it's really serious, especially because of how quickly they're moving. And so I think there are three main things about these changes that are welcome. The first is that the definition of what qualifies as a specialized skill or a specialized worker is going to be narrowed because right now it's way too broad. The second thing is it's going to be much harder for companies to underpay these H-1B workers, which is an incentive for replacing Americans with them because you can pay one person less than the other. That's going to incentivize this racket, right? And the other issue that DHS is covering is they're improving the tools that the government has to enforce worksite compliance with properly paying these people and making sure that they're not being exploited. So all this is good.
So you recently wrote a piece about H-1B visas and the idea of replacing U.S. workers with cheap foreign labor. So I want to get your thoughts on that in just a second, because one data point that really stuck out to me was that the Census Bureau says that about 3/4 of STEM workers aren't actually or grads aren't working in STEM fields. And it's interesting to me because we always hear that we need to import more workers because we don't have enough people to fill those jobs. And yet here the census is telling us we have more than enough.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And there are a lot of different factors for that. I think one of them is demoralization. If you've been a lot of the tech workers I talk to, their attitude is basically that. When you're working in this industry where you can be replaced with an H-1B, it's kind of like having a sword hanging over your head. And to give you an idea of how rife this problem was of importing cheap laborers to replace Americans, the Department of Labor did, I should say, the Economic Policy Institute analyzed Department of Labor data recently, I think earlier this year, and they found that 60% of H-1B positions certified by the Department of Labor are paid well below the local median wage for the occupation. So if you're working in STEM, you get laid off enough times and replaced enough times, it's going to probably encourage you to not work in that industry anymore because what's the point? And this is a common complaint I hear from tech workers is that they can't hold down jobs and that they're constantly moving from one job to the next because of these problems that DHS is trying to redress.
So we see universities, we see crony capitalists, we see a lot of crooked politicians. They're all pushing to bring in more and more and more of cheap foreign labor to fill our jobs. What are they getting out of this, and why do they push for it so hard?
Well, it's money, and I think that's really what it comes down to. There's a lot of talk of diversity and inclusion and stuff like that, but it's really just a cover for how ruthless this scheme is. Facebook has a policy on hiring people that are non-U.S. citizens as part of their diversity initiative. But the reality is that, or at least before Trump and this new regulation that's being rolled out, uh, the reality is that hiring non-U.S. citizens, especially on the H-1Bs, means hiring people that can't really complain about working conditions because if they do, they get fired, and people that you know you can pay them less for what they're doing compared to an American. So it comes down to money and it comes down to power because at the end of the day, all of the revenue that companies like Facebook and Apple and Twitter generate, a lot of that goes into campaign donations, overwhelmingly for the Democratic Party. So there is a real connection between the immigrant, the cheap labor racket, and how it sort of bankrolls left-wing politics.